My first several weeks spent quarantined at home did not yield tidier closets and drawers. My COVID-19 flirtation with sourdough bread was thoroughly disappointing. And it was a struggle to get the kids to play board games with us after dinner, even though they had nowhere else to go. However, after long days exploring new and safe ways to be church and oodles of Zoom calls in my dining room, I burst out of the house every Saturday morning to play in the dirt. It was a lovely spring to observe up close and personal on those Saturdays. I discovered native celandine poppies growing in clumps between the gutter downspout and the pine trees. Celandine, or as Piper calls them, Celine Dion poppies, celandine means swallows. These are the flowers of early spring, heralding the return of the swallows each year. They mark the new season, and they stick around long enough that I had time to transplant all of them around my pine trees. These are beautiful flowers, bright yellow and simple, yet showy, with 4 flat petals on each flower, crowning a bushy clump of lacy-lobed bluish-green leaves. I presume that our celandine poppies were pollinated by our local team of bees, and thanks to the bees, they grew these lovely, silvery, fuzzy fruit pendants. The overall effect is a cheerful little flower that looks like it's heading home from market, carrying its little packages in its hands. I want to give credit for these lovely clumps of cheerful flowers where credit is due. The same little chipmunks that drive my dogs crazy by hiding in the downspouts must be the sowers of the seeds, planting celandine poppies behind them as they run for the safety of either the pine trees on the one side or the downspout. Inadvertently sowing seeds, I imagine, as all they know is that the fuzzy fruit packages taste delicious. As the chipmunks inadvertently drop the seeds into the moist pine needle undergrowth, they drop a little bit of God's creation magic into the soil. Each seed is a container complete with a starter kit for roots and a starter kit for the poppies to grow. Drop a seed in the ideal acidity of the pine needle floor, shade the area with the house and pine trees, and water it with all the outflow from the downspouts, and abracadabra, 50 or more celandine poppies dotted the ground in early spring. The same God who connected the chipmunk to the celandine poppy fruit, to the perfect soil and shade and water combination, also connects us to the conditions that most glorify God with truth and beauty and innovation. God sows in each one of us the seeds of truth and beauty and innovation. Given that we have more intellectual capacity than chipmunks, you're welcome, sorry little guys, God partners with us to sow the seeds. God utilizes us, God partners with us, and God entrusts us with seeing to the type of conditions that best support the starter kits within us. God put inside each one of us in our soul a starter kit for roots and a starter kit for beautiful growth, to grow a flowering plant that feeds others, that brings joy to others, that is destined to flourish. We rely on both starter kits, the roots that nourish us and the growth that nourishes the world around us. Jesus came to a rooted people, a people who had deep roots in a religious tradition that offered meaning, offered an ethical and moral way to live, offered a way to be connected intimately with God. Jesus came to pollinate these rooted people to enhance the fruit they bore for the world around them, especially in the face of the soul-crushing oppression that they were experiencing in life under Roman occupancy. Jesus pollinated using parables, and parables are really tough to understand. Parables are disturbing stories that threaten the people's secure, mythologically constructed world. When Jesus told a parable, people didn't smile or nod or say, "Ooh, that's nice." They were startled by them. They were confused and shocked and maybe even terrified. The mythologies they held dear may have trapped them, but the traps were familiar, and the parables undoing the trap could be really frightening. Parables still challenge the assumptions that we hold, the unnoticed frameworks that we habitually use to interpret our lives, our thinking. Parable exposes traps that have us in their grips. Jesus uses parables to pollinate the people, to move from what is fruitless, unconscious mythology to create new ways of thinking, a new way of making meaning. Jesus uses parables to disrupt, to wake up, to remind people that it is all right to take some risks, that the starter kit for life and joy and flourishing is already within them, that it's time to bear some fruit and share it. It's time to grow. A parable is more of a lifelong conversation partner than a riddle to solve. Studying the parables of Jesus opens us to a little disruption, a little self-examination. Well, goodness sakes, following Jesus in general does that as well. Following Jesus, being a Jesus follower, often disrupts some things we'd rather leave alone. Some old ways of thinking or acting that we'd rather not examine under the microscope. So many things become much less entertaining when we let the power of Jesus disrupt us. Things like dishing about other people's failings, petty arguments, our closely guarded sense of our own status, mythologies of shame and secrecy that lurk in the darkness. When Jesus comes in with his teachings, his parables, with his healing powers, and enters our life, and when we give in to that teaching and healing in our life, so many demons go running for the hills. The demons go running for the hills. It's good news. And the old mythologies lose their power over us. And we find our lives open to the freedom, open to the joy, open to the clarity that God offers to us in that original starter kit within our soul. To follow Jesus in such a way that it bears fruit in our lives, that it bears freedom and clarity and joy, we want to say to ourselves the following phrase and say it often. Here it is. Let me consider that idea or perspective that I hold dear in the light of Jesus' teaching and life. Let me consider that idea in the light of Jesus. Let me consider that perspective that I hold dear to my heart in the light of Jesus' life and teaching. Calmly, with trust in God, using a phrase like this, we can begin to discern what is mythology and what is rooted in Jesus' teaching. We believe more in the active, ongoing power of Jesus to change us and to change society than we believe in the power of the old mythologies that choke out the new growth. So a word about Jesus' life and teaching. In order to hold something up against the life and teaching of Jesus, we need to know something about Jesus' life and teaching. For many of us, that's where we go next. We commit to an earnest, scholarly, and yet spiritual study of Jesus. If that's your next step, I highly recommend a wonderful book that you probably already own, the Gospel of Luke. Yes, I know that we're reading Matthew's Gospel today and for the next several Sundays, but Luke is my favorite, and I only ever recommend my favorite of anything to my friends when it comes to reading. So I'm recommending my favorite Jesus stories to you. Of the 4 Jesus stories, the 4 Gospels, I love Luke, and I hope you'll read it with me. Read Luke and make a list in a separate sheet of paper as you go. What did Jesus teach and do in Luke's gospel? How did he teach it? How did he do it? If you want, you can join me in a new spiritual practice that I'm starting this week. I'm writing out the Gospel of Luke by hand. Slowly, a few verses or a chapter at a sitting each morning. I really want to know Jesus so that I can know his teaching better and apply it to my life, so that I can experience more joy, more freedom, more clarity about God and how God calls me to live. As you can imagine, holding on to the old mythologies is a lot easier than understanding and applying Jesus' teachings in our lives. Following Jesus has its challenges, yet if we pause to notice, we find that the growth starter kit already taking shape within by the grace of God that calls you to grow and flourish. Not only is the growth for the benefit of each one of us as individual followers of Jesus, it does benefit us individually, yet the growth is God's gracious gift for the people, for the families, communities, and institutions all around us. This is the way out. This is the way out of whatever mess or problem or intractable situation we might find ourselves in. To follow Jesus faithfully, to wrestle with the old mythologies, and to plant seeds of grace that grow and grow and grow.